Okay guys, welcome back to Teal House Farm. Today we are going to can onions and we're going to do it two ways. One that needs a pressure canner and one that needs a water bath canner. So if you do not have a pressure canner, you are still going to be able to can some onions. Today for both projects, we're just using yellow onions. You could also use red onions, Vidalia onions. Really, all onions are kind of the same, but we're just using the cheap old yellow onions. And we're going to be canning in half-pint jars. Half pints can look all sorts of different ways, but we're going to do a half pint. We're going to be canning just plain onions, and we're going to have those for things like making onion gravy, for adding to soups and stews and casseroles. Really anything that you would use a cooked onion in, and it's great because they're already going to be pre-chopped and pre-cooked, so you're going to save yourself some time on the prep end to make quick meals in the future. And we will also be canning like a tangy pickled type onion, and that's the one we'll do in the water bath canner. And I'm really excited for this because I think it's going to be a great addition to like chicken or tuna salads where I like a little bit of a tang and a kick. It's also going to be really good on a sandwich, things like that. So something with a little bit of zesty spice to it. Both recipes start out exactly the same though. We're just gonna take this 3-pound bag of onions and we're going to dice them into small-ish pieces. We'll show you the pieces here in a minute. The recommendation is to make sure your onions are less than one inch when they're diced up. So you can either can whole small onion bulbs, like the ones that didn't develop enough in the ground, you can can those, or you could take whole onions and chop them into smaller pieces. Do remember to save your peels here. These are going to be great for making any type of broth in the future, so just stick them in a freezer bag and stick them in your freezer. And I would love any suggestions that you guys have as how to make dicing onions less painful. I've tried the technique where you cut it in half quickly and then turn it upside down so the hearts are down. It's supposed to make them bother your eyes less. I don't feel that that's actually true. So my go-to is to wear goggles when I dice onions so that the vapors don't get into my eyes. So if you have a suggestion that works really well, I'd love to hear it. So let's get these diced. We're just gonna chop them up and then stick them in this old ice cream bucket for right now. So we put a lid on it to keep the vapors out of the way. And then we will split them up into 2 groups to make our 2 different canning projects. Okay, let's get started. I always like to wear an apron when I'm working on projects to help protect my clothes. This is a good sturdy one. It's like a denim material. Definitely seen better days, but it has a lot of life left in it. And of course our goggles, because nobody likes to cry when they're cutting onions. We're gonna need a cutting board, a good knife, and a bag for our scraps so we can freeze them for broth making. Let's get these skins off and into the freezer bag, and then we're just gonna chop them into large-ish chunks so that we can get them ready to can. Okay, all set. We got a nice bag here of the outer layer of the onions. We're just going to stick this in the freezer. And then when we want to make broth in the future, we already have that ready to go. So let me show you the setup, and we're going to be all ready to can. We're going to do just the plain onions first because they're going to need longer. And then while those are canning, we'll get things set up with the water bath canner for the pickled onions. We have our lids and rings that are washed. I just have them in some warm water to help soften the seals a little bit. We have our half pints that we're going to be pressure canning. I'm doing a small batch today because I wanted to do both types of onions, so just 6. Our pressure canner is set up. I have already done my safety checks. If you are new to pressure canning, your safety checks are listed in the front of your manual, and we'll teach you how to check your canner to make sure everything is ready and good to go. And we have filled the canner to middle knuckle deep with water, and then we've turned it on to make sure that the water gets hot. We don't want it boiling yet. We'll set it to boil, get it started boiling once we're all loaded and the lid is on. I'm heating water to boil in my kettle, and then we will go ahead and get started. By the way, I didn't cut my finger chopping onions. I peeled my fingernail back, and I figured nobody wants to look at that on camera, so I covered it up for you. Next thing we're going to do, the water is almost ready, so we're going to go ahead and put onions in our jars. I always fill a warm jar. There's some argument about whether or not you really need to. I was always taught that making sure the jar was warm helps to protect the integrity of the jar. So you can put them in a pot of water and heat it to a boil to warm them up, or you can put them in your oven on 220 to warm them up. Everyone has their own way. Some people don't warm them. When you are pressure canning, you do not need to sterilize your jars. They just need to be clean. The pressure canner is going to sterilize for you. When we get to the water bath, we will have to sterilize our jars, and I'll show you that process. But my jars are warm so that when I hit them with hot boiling water, when I top off the onions, I don't take a risk of cracking a jar. Let's get these onions in the jars. So I'm going to use a wide mouth funnel to help make it less messy, but you definitely don't have to have one of these. I'm going to fill the jars to just about that bottom ring and give the jars a little bit of a shake to help the onions settle. You do not want to press them in them or cram them into the jars, but a little shake will help them fill in the empty spots. It's okay to put a little bit too much in the jars because when you add the water, that's also going to help the onions settle. And in the end, you could always take a few out if you needed to. We're going to pour in the hot boiling water. We want just about an inch of head space, which is just to that bottom ring. And then we're going to use a plastic knife or whatever else you can find. This is a popsicle stick to debubble. We just go around the edges to make sure we get all the air bubbles out. And then we wipe the rings so that they're clean. And we put the lids and rings on and put them in our canner. The canner has hot water in it that goes up to my middle knuckle. So it's about 2 inches worth of hot water. You do not want the water boiling yet. We want to wait until we get it loaded and get the lid on before we get it to a boil. Next up, let's get that lid on, make sure it's good and tight, and turn it around so we can see that pressure gauge. We got to keep an eye on that the whole time, and we're going to bring this up to a boil. While we're waiting for that to hit a boil so we can put the weight on, we're going to get started on our pickled onions. These are bread and butter canned onions. I will put the link to this recipe below. It's from somebody else's vlog. It typically uses 6 onions. I think we have 5 diced ones left, so we'll be a little bit short, but it's always my rule of thumb to have a little extra brine anyway because it's annoying to run out. So I will link this recipe below. Again, it does have a lot of sugar in it, but man, is this a delicious canned onion, and it is great for sandwiches or chicken or tuna salads where you want a little bit of a bite and sweet flavor in there. Once we get this all put together, we're going to bring it up to a boil, and then we'll get it ready to can. Okay, so our canner has been steaming for a bit, usually about 10 minutes is what you want to look for, so we're going to add our weight on and let it get to pressure. For us, that's 11 pounds. You will need to Google your altitude to figure out, but for most people in the United States, it's going to be 11 pounds unless you're like in the Mile High City. We are going to process them for 40 minutes, but remember your timer does not start until you are up to pressure. You need to maintain your pressure, your 11 pounds on the gauge, the entire canning time. If you go below that number, you have to start your timer over. If you go a little bit above, it's okay, but keep a close eye on it. You don't want to go too much above, or you're going to have a lot of water siphoning, or you could break jars, or if you forget about it completely and let that pressure really get out of control, you'll blow up your canner. Okay, sorry about all my dishes, been a busy day, but we have these jars now. We're still doing half pints for these pickled onions, and we're going to sterilize them. So there's a couple different schools of thought about sterilizing jars. The official recommendation from the USDA is to run them through your dishwasher. That will wash them and sterilize them. I do not have a dishwasher, so we are going to be sterilizing these in a big pot. I'm just going to put them in a pot of hot water, bring that water to a boil, and that'll sterilize the jars. I also sometimes sterilize in the oven if I'm doing a lot of jars, and that means I would put 15 jars on a cookie sheet, put it in the oven on 220 for somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes. That is not officially the recommended method, but it does work, so you have to do what works best for you. We also need to sterilize, whoopsies. All right, try that again. We also need to sterilize the rings and the lids. And we're just going to use this separate pot. Just going to bring them again to like a simmering boil. And I want to let you know that I am going to be reusing lids for this project. Find one here. The official recommendation is that these are one-time use lids because this seal material, this rubber on the inside, will disintegrate over time. However, if a seal is in good shape, and the lid is not dented or dinged, or the seal doesn't show broken or it's not all rusty inside, I will save and reuse them because these are expensive. And I'll reuse them on projects where if we get a bad seal, because that's what risk you're running here is a bad seal, that a reused lid won't seal as well. that is something that can be put in the fridge for a long time. So these are pickled onions. It's a pickled product. It could sit in the fridge for quite a while before there would be an issue. So I feel like it's a low risk undertaking, and it's going to save me a lot of money reusing these lids. Let's finish up. We're almost done. We're going to turn the heat off because these are boiling. Look at that beautiful color. That's from the turmeric. Just such a neat, bright, vibrant color. We are going to fill our jars here. You probably really do want that wide mouth funnel. It's going to make it a lot easier to get all this in the jars. You want to make sure you get plenty of brine and plenty of onion in each jar, not heavy on either end. And this one only needs a 1/2 inch head space, but I like to be a little more conservative with the head space, so we're going to just fill to that bottom ring. But you can go a little bit higher and just do that 1/2 inch. We're going to wipe the rims, and then we're going to put on our lids and our rings, and we're going to put them in our water bath canner. We're going to make sure that the hot water is above the top of the jars in the water bath canner. They need to be fully submerged, so use all the hot boiling water you got, what you use to sterilize your jars and your rings, and then add more hot water if you need it. Please do not pour cold water into your hot water bath canner. You will probably crack a jar. Once it's sufficiently filled, we'll go ahead and put the lid on and bring it to a boil. Okay, we've got our canner up on a rolling boil, so we'll set our timer. It's just 10 minutes in the canner for these. Okay, timer is up on the water bath canner, so I'm just gonna turn the heat off. We're gonna lift the lid, but we're gonna let the jar sit in the water for probably a good 5 minutes before we move them. Always open away from you so you don't burn yourself. And as you can see, the pressure canner is almost done, so once that beeps, we'll turn the heat off. With the pressure canner, you don't do anything. Just leave it until it gets to 0. Don't touch it, don't remove the weight, just leave it. Okay, be patient, keep yourself safe. We are all done. We have 6 1/2 pints of our... He's fine. He's just done with his dinner. He wants more. 6 1/2 pints of the pickled ones and 6 1/2 pints of the plain ones. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy canning some onions. We're going to get this baby ready for bed.